3 days before Christmas in 2022, while Denver's streets sparkled under a blanket of snow and soft jazz renditions of holiday classics drifted from passing cars, my world quietly unraveled with one phone call. I had just stepped into my one-bedroom apartment near Capitol Hill, exhausted from another double shift at the community clinic. My fingers were numb, my breath still fogging from the icy wind. I kicked off my boots, peeled off my navy scrubs, and sighed at the sight of the small suitcase by the door. Already packed. A pine green scarf was folded on top, and a handful of carefully wrapped gifts, each one thoughtful, intentional, waited patiently beside it like silent offerings. I'd remembered the nutmeg. I'd even tracked down the exact toffee my aunt swore by. I had done everything right, again, hoping this year I'd be enough. When my phone buzzed and Julian lit up on the screen. My older brother. I answered with an automatic smile. "Hey, Jules." But his tone wasn't warm, it was careful. "Hey, Lena, so, just a heads up, Marina's coming to Christmas this year." I paused. His new girlfriend, the one who practiced sound healing and once saged the living room because I mentioned I worked in palliative care. "She's really big on emotional alignment," he continued. "And the energy you carry from the clinic, it's just kind of a lot for her. So we thought maybe for this year, you could just take a break. You understand, right? Nothing personal." I stared at the blinking lights on my thrift store tree, suddenly dimmed. Nothing personal. Before I could respond, my mother called. Her voice was sugar-coated steel. "Sweetheart, we just want peace. You know how sensitive Marina is. If you come, it could make things awkward. Honestly, if you show up, we may not open the door." No lies, no sugar-coated omissions, just rejection, delivered with a bout. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I didn't beg to be included. I just stood there, phone in hand, looking at the little gifts I'd wrapped with trembling hope. For people who had never made space for me, people who only noticed my absence when it inconvenienced their comfort. And this year, finally, I let that silence speak for me. I moved slowly, deliberately, like someone folding up the last chairs after an invisible funeral. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. The automatic transfer to cover my parents' overdue property tax canceled. The quiet monthly deposit into Julian's startup fund locked. The car insurance plan I had co-signed for Dad last year terminated. I wasn't angry, just done. For so long I'd believed that if I gave enough, stayed useful enough, kept showing up with casseroles and calmness, I'd earn a seat at the table. Not just physically. Emotionally, spiritually. I thought being dependable made me indispensable. But in that warm silence, surrounded by cinnamon-scented air and the low hum of my old radiator, the truth settled like snow. I was never celebrated. I was simply allowed until I wasn't. Outside my window, the first flakes began to fall, soft and certain, muffling the city in white hush. I stared through the glass and felt something surprising. Relief. No more effort to fit in. No more asking, shrinking, tiptoeing. No more asking to be let in. This Christmas, I wouldn't be the outsider pressing her face to the window. I wouldn't be the almost enough they only remembered when something needed fixing. I used to think this was normal. How some kids got spotlight and softness while others were expected to function like furniture. Steady, supportive, and silent. I was the oldest. The practice run, as my dad liked to say at cookouts. The test child. The one who had to earn affection through usefulness. Meanwhile, Julian, 5 years younger, was the miracle baby. The charmer. The dreamer. When he skipped rent to fund his band's third album attempt, it was ambition. When I took an extra shift at the hospital, I was overdoing it again. I remembered when he spray-painted abstract shapes across the garage wall at 15. My parents called it passion. Art. They laughed. I dropped a casserole dish 2 days later and got a lecture on carelessness. Once, in high school, I filled out a FAFSA application and left it on the counter for Mom to sign. I even highlighted where. She never asked about it. When my med school acceptance arrived, I brought it home like a trophy. She glanced at it and muttered, "That's intense. Just don't lose yourself in it." Then she turned back to chopping celery. And when Julian dropped out of school for the third time to launch a healing podcast, they hosted a welcome back dinner with candles and wine. There had been balloons, cake, even a framed photo of Julian clutching a paintbrush, still hanging in the front hallway like it was a sacred relic. The same house that had never thrown me a single graduation party seemed to vibrate with pride for the son who hadn't held a steady job in years. I once found one of my old sketchbooks there, half filled with doodles from hospital breaks, scribbled scenes of Denver sunsets, and patients' hands mid-recovery, tossed in the recycling bin beneath takeout menus and expired coupons. When I asked about it, they shrugged, laughed, said they thought it was scrap paper. Maybe it was to them. Maybe I was too. Still, I kept showing up. Through med school, through residency, through the graveyard shifts spent in quiet rooms where most doctors didn't linger. Rooms filled with fading photos, wisp-upped regrets, and the ache of being left behind. That's why I chose geriatrics. I saw myself in those long-forgotten spaces. People who had poured out their lives and were now only noticed when things broke. At home, my role never shifted. I was the calm one, the helper, the invisible hand keeping the cracks from spreading. When the roof started leaking after a snowstorm and the insurance denied the claim, I paid for it, quietly. When Julian's freelance work dried up again, I transferred money without asking questions. When my mom's hip started locking again and her physical therapist stopped coming due to missed payments, I called, scheduled, covered, coordinated. Because I loved them. Or because I still believed that love was something transactional, something you earned through sacrifice. They never said thank you. They didn't need to. In their world, love wasn't spoken aloud. It was assumed, expected, like gravity or daylight. And every time I handed over a piece of myself, they took it, not maliciously, just blindly, never once asking what it cost me. For years, I thought that's what family meant. Being unseen but indispensable. Like scaffolding, essential, but never the focus. But that night, after the calls telling me I wasn't welcome at Christmas, something in me snapped. I realized scaffolding isn't meant to bleed for the building it holds up. I was done watching my life shrink to make theirs more comfortable. If this story resonates with you, even just a little, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to come, and trust me, the next part, that's when everything changes. When Julian impulsively bought a new set of vintage lenses for his documentary project and couldn't afford his Thanksgiving flight home, I bought his ticket. Again. He hugged me at the gate, called me the best sister in the universe, and by the following week, it was forgotten. Just another favor folded neatly into the invisible ledger I was never supposed to acknowledge. No one had to ask. I was always one step ahead, like some ghost in the background machinery of their lives, fixing, covering, smoothing. Quietly. Never seen, but always necessary. They never said thank you. Maybe because gratitude makes it harder to keep leaning on someone without pause. I told myself it was easier that way. Gratitude made you visible, and visible things could be judged or left behind. So I disappeared behind the drywall of their comfort, the hidden beam that never broke, until now. Sometimes after 12-hour shifts at the hospital, I'd sit by the window with peppermint tea and wonder what it would feel like to simply be seen, not for what I could solve or pay for or hold together, just seen, not as a backup plan, not as scaffolding, but as Lena. But those thoughts were luxuries. And wishes? Wishes were for golden boys with sketchbooks, not girls with tax software and heating bills. So I kept going. I brought the bread pudding every Christmas, the one they loved, and smiled when they asked, "Who made this again?" Like it floated in on a holiday breeze. When Julian's rent fell short, I wired money without a word. When my parents called, Confused by their W2S, I stayed on the phone past midnight, guiding them line by line, while my own taxes waited in a neat, unopened pile beside the fridge. I told myself love meant showing up, being steady, solving everything. That, one day, if I carried enough weight, someone would turn around and finally see me under it. But standing there in my tiny kitchen, the phone still warm from the call that had banished me from Christmas for being too much, I knew better. They wouldn't see me. Not because they didn't care, but because I had never asked them to. I had trained them not to. That night, with cinnamon clinging to the air and snow falling like absolution beyond my window, I picked up my phone. Not to call, not to beg. I opened my banking app. Quietly, I hit cancel. The $800.00 I'd been sending each month to keep their mortgage afloat, gone. Emergency savings, locked. No more surprise repairs, no more middle-of-the-night rescues. Julian's dead car battery next winter. That would be his problem. At first, it felt robotic. Just a few taps. Cancel auto transfer. End payment authorization. Freeze joint access. Like brushing my teeth or paying my rent. Routine. But with every click, a strange stillness unfurled inside me. Not numbness, not bitterness. It felt like freedom. A bird stretching inside me, wings dry, tentative. Realizing the cage door had been left ajar this whole time, I opened my notebook and made a list, not to guilt myself, just to see. All the quiet debts I had swallowed without a word. The flights, the surprise surgeries, the bounced checks, the broken down cars. The dozens of emergencies I had patched up behind the scenes, without thanks, without ceremony. The ink blurred, not from tears, but from the weight of finally witnessing my own exhaustion. I wasn't angry, no matter how they'd spin it later. Lena's being cold. Lena's always so intense. No, I wasn't angry. And the thing about being invisible for so long is people only notice when you're gone. When things fall. The missed mortgage payment wouldn't sting until the final notice came. The canceled maintenance fund wouldn't matter until the pipes burst again in January. Julian's gigs would still rise and fall like waves, but this time, no net beneath him. No quiet sister stitching it all together with love and bank wires. I didn't make announcements. No dramatic exit. No cryptic Facebook posts. I didn't even tell Aunt Ramona, the only one who still mailed birthday cards in cursive. I just unplugged the half-written Christmas message I'd drafted, wishing warmth and love. I deleted it. The little tree I'd set up in the corner, I unplugged its lights. The presents I'd wrapped, carefully, thoughtfully, I slid them into the hall closet, their shiny paper suddenly ridiculous in the face of my decision. I didn't cry. There was no room for sadness, just clarity. Love isn't supposed to feel like an unpaid job. Family shouldn't feel like a subscription with a hidden fee. I had spent decades trying to earn what should have been freely given. But silence is not love, and usefulness is not belonging. Across town, in a house filled with lights and noise, they laughed without me. And for the first time, I let them. I let them build their celebration on the illusion they had spent years curating, the one where I was the problem, the one where my silence was interpreted as bitterness, my distance as blame, where I was the heavy one, the complicated one, the one who never quite fit the sparkle of their curated holidays. For the first time, I didn't show up, and in doing so, I reclaimed something I hadn't even known I'd surrendered. Christmas morning arrived, soft and gray, the Denver skyline cloaked in fog, snow still clinging to the roofs like forgotten frosting. The silence outside echoed the silence within. I sat by the window wrapped in my favorite blanket, the one that smelled faintly of rosemary and comfort. A warm mug of cinnamon apple tea cradled in my hands, the steam rising like memory. I didn't light the tree. I didn't press play on the carefully curated holiday playlist. I once used to fill the gaps. I didn't call. I didn't text. I simply was. Quiet. Whole. Still. The presents I'd wrapped sat untouched in the corner. Colorful, cheerful, a little naive. They looked foreign now, like they belonged to someone who still believed that effort guaranteed belonging. But there was no grief that morning. No ache. No tears. Just stillness. Sacred, cleansing stillness. Like the breath after a long scream. Like air after a storm. I hadn't realized how much noise I'd been carrying until it vanished. Time moved differently that day. Noon passed like a whisper. No calls. No background clatter from my parents' kitchen. No festive selfies from Julian and Marina with hashtags about joy. No Venmo requests for surprise holiday expenses. Just silence. I felt no urge to interrupt it. Until evening fell and the sky turned a bruised purple. My phone buzzed once, then again, 3 times in total. At first, I ignored it, probably some group thread from work I'd forgotten to mute. But then, a message lit the screen. Ramona, can you answer? You've done enough damage already. I froze. Damage? I hadn't even been there. My phone rang, her name flashed again. I picked up, my voice rough from disuse. What happened? Her tone was gentle, like she was approaching something broken. They're saying you ruined Christmas, she said quietly. But Lena, you weren't even there. The words hit like ice. I blinked. How do you ruin something you weren't invited to? She hesitated, then began explaining in fragmented pieces. Apparently sometime after dinner, Marina, wineglass in hand, began admiring the family photos on the mantel. She had paused in front of one photo, a faded, slightly crooked snapshot from a birthday party long ago. I must have been 11 or 12, caught mid-laugh, in a too big maroon sweater, one sleeve nearly swallowing my hand. Marina tilted her head, squinting, and then she said it, clearly enough for the whole living room to hear. That's Dr. Lena Morgan, isn't it? Aunt Ramona nodded slowly. She's the one who sat with my neighbor through the night. Saved her life, really. The air shifted. Laughter cut off like someone had flipped a switch. Forks hovered mid-air. Glasses stopped clinking. Julian went pale. My mother's smile froze. Marina looked from face to face and asked, Wait, Lena's your sister? The one you talk about? No one answered right away. But whatever they said, whatever half-truth or evasive comment came next, was enough. Marina gathered her things, thanked everyone with a politeness sharp enough to cut glass, and walked out. Just like that, by the time Aunt Ramona called me, the ripple had already begun. Marina had posted something, nothing explosive, just honest. A few sharp lines about how families rewrite people to fit prettier stories, about how silence is a form of erasure, about the damage done in rooms lined with smiling photos of people you pretend don't exist. I didn't know the exact wording. I didn't need to. I could picture it clearly, the crash of the curated image, the family friends reading between the lines, the art circles in New York, small and gossipy, the quiet unraveling of a brand built on charm and exclusivity. And for once, someone else had noticed. Not someone raised in it, not someone trained to interpret cruelty as affection. Someone who had seen me, not as a burden but as a human being, a doctor, a sister, a presence. That night, sitting alone in the stillness of my apartment, I learned something more powerful than any comeback. Sometimes the sharpest truth is the silence you leave behind. The day after Christmas, it began. Desperation leaking through polished cracks. An email titled, Let's Reset Things. It read like a corporate memo, bland, polished, full of nothing. It was signed jointly by my mother, my father, and Julian, as if unity could overwrite decades of fracture. No real apology, just talk of heightened emotions, holiday stress, valuing family. Buried halfway down, I found the real request. Could I reach out to Marina, clarify things, smooth it over? Not because they missed me, not because they finally understood, but because Julian's art career was at risk. It wasn't about me. It had never been about me. Just the mess my absence had left behind. A mirror they could no longer avoid. They hadn't reached out because they missed me. They had simply realized the cost of erasing me had risen higher than they were willing to pay. I didn't reply. That night, as snow whispered against my windows, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't family. It was the hospital administrator. David Reynolds, a man I'd only met once at a charity gala. Kind eyes, firm handshake. He sounded hesitant. "Lena," he began, "this is a little awkward. But I got a call from your father." He cleared his throat. He said he's worried about your emotional well-being, that maybe you've been under stress lately and might need some time off. My blood turned to ice. Not the kind that numbs, but the kind that hardens. Sharp, weaponizing concern. My father, the man who once laughed that I was too intense for my own good, was now using that very trait to paint me unstable. Not because he believed it, but because he thought it would control me, shake me, scare me into silence. It didn't work. David saw through it. Said as much. But the message was clear. They weren't seeking reconciliation. They were seeking leverage. And that failed. The next move came. A curated smear campaign through group texts. Quiet whispers to cousins and distant aunts. "Lena's just going through a tough time right now. She's isolating herself. She's overwhelmed." No mention of Christmas. No mention of exclusion. Just concerned, weaponized into control. A cousin I hadn't spoken to since Julian's first art show messaged me out of nowhere. "Hey love, if you ever need a yoga retreat, I've got a discount code." Overwhelmed? Awake. Each polished manipulation, every betrayal wrapped in performative care, only sharpened my clarity. They weren't protecting me. They were protecting their narrative. The one where Julian was the gifted heart of the family and I was the quiet utility who never made waves. But I was done smoothing their story. The snow outside kept falling, slowly erasing the footprints of every path I'd taken to make myself smaller for them. And for the first time, I felt no urge to correct the record, no need to defend myself. I knew the truth. But it didn't end there. It never does, not with people who believe they are entitled to your silence. It came next, wrapped in softness, my mother's voice. Outside my door. A quiet Sunday, mid-January. That bone-deep winter cold pressing against the windows like it was breathing. I was at my desk, charting patient notes. A mug of tea sat forgotten beside me. That's when I heard it. A soft knock. I didn't move. I just listened to my heartbeat. Steady, calm. Then I rose, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. There they were. My mother, my father, Julian, bundled in coats, smiles stretched thin. A picture-perfect apology, framed in desperation. I wouldn't open the door. Not yet. I didn't feel fear, just a detached, aching sadness. The kind you feel when you finally realized the rescue ship you spent years watching for was just another mirage on the horizon. I opened the door an inch, just enough to let the cold slip through the crack and sting my skin, not enough to invite them in. My mother spoke first. Her voice was soft, practiced, coated in something meant to sound maternal. "We just want to talk," she said, gripping her purse like it might hold all the right words. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't soften. Because I finally saw it clearly. They weren't here for me. They were here for the old version of me. The one who still believed love could be earned. The girl who folded herself smaller and smaller to squeeze into the tiny spaces they offered. That girl didn't live here anymore. Silence swelled between us, brittle and loud. I watched my father's jaw twitch, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. Julian shifted from foot to foot like his sneakers might lift him off the porch entirely. They were uncomfortable. After a moment, I gave them the only word that mattered. No. No speeches, no justifications. No bridges built out of my own splinters. Just no. My mother's face cracked, part confusion, part disbelief. As if she couldn't fathom that the reliable scaffolding she'd leaned on for decades had finally crumbled by choice. I closed the door. Quietly, not a slam, not a statement, just a boundary. I loved it with steady hands. Outside, I heard the rise and fall of muffled voices, first pleading, then sharper, tinged with the frustration of people not used to being denied. But I didn't listen. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and wrapped my fingers around my mug of cold tea, letting the silence wrap around me like something sacred. On the shelf beside me sat the framed letter from Marina, the ink slightly smudged, her handwriting pressed with intention and care. I looked at it and felt, for the first time, weightless. I thought of all the years I'd spent trying to mold myself into a daughter they could applaud, of how I'd soaked up their guilt, their silence, their neglect, and turned it into fuel to keep showing up. I was never meant to be a mirror, ever born to reflect their pride, or to absorb their disappointment. There was something else. And maybe, finally, that was enough. They didn't leave right away. I heard shoes shuffle, voices murmur, desperation curling at the edges. Then another knock, softer. "Lena, please, we just want to talk." I stayed seated. The framed letter from Marina anchoring me. My tea cold, bitter, and strangely satisfying. I let the knocking continue until it softened, then stopped. Silence settled again. Not hollow this time, but full. For the first time, I understood. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reopening the door. Sometimes it means choosing not to. Sometimes it means standing tall while the very people who fractured you exhaust themselves against the boundary you finally had the strength to build. A wall not made of bitterness, but of self-worth. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Then came the shuffle of retreating footsteps, the dull clunk of car doors, the hesitant hum of the engine. They were gone. Not shattered. Just denied. I stood and walked slowly to the window, drawing the curtain back just enough to see the taillights fading into the snow-dusted street. I didn't flinch. I didn't reach for my phone. I felt no pull to run after them, no aching desire to fix what they had broken with their silence. Only peace. Real peace. The kind that settles deep in your chest when you finally stop begging for a seat at a table that was never set for you. Turned away from the window. My apartment felt warmer now. Not louder, not brighter, just mine. The Christmas tree still stood in the corner, its lights unplugged, ornaments untouched. But it no longer looked sad. The wrapped gifts, still there, but no longer symbols of rejection. They were reminders. I had tried. I had loved. I had given the best parts of myself with open hands. They just never saw it. I brewed another cup of tea, stronger this time. Let the steam rise around my face as I pulled the blanket tighter across my shoulders, and returned to my desk. The letter from Marina caught the afternoon light. "You made a difference," she had written. "You didn't give up. You made her feel like she mattered." My fingers brushed the frame, wooden, imperfect, solid. The cool glass was smooth beneath my skin, real, unshakable. Even when your family refuses to see your worth, someone else will. Someone honest. Someone watching. I thought of all the years I spent folding myself to fit, and finally realized I was never meant to be smaller. Not for them. Not for anyone. Closing the door hadn't been an act of cruelty. It was clarity. They hadn't come because they loved me. They came because they needed control. The quiet, dependable version of me who no longer existed. But that girl, she was gone. In her place stood a woman who finally knew. Love doesn't require your silence. It doesn't demand your sacrifice. And it never, ever asks you to shatter just to keep someone else whole. I sat back, sipped my tea, and watched the snow fall. Soft, silent, cleansing, and I realized this time I had saved myself. Maybe for the first time, I was free. The days passed slowly, gently, like deep breaths after a storm. The silence no longer felt like isolation. It felt like space I had never been allowed to claim before. I went back to work. I made rounds at the hospital. I sat with patients whose families came with flowers and cards, and with those whose rooms stayed empty except for the hum of machines and my quiet presence. I listened. I stayed. I did the work that mattered, the kind that doesn't trend online, that doesn't make for glossy photo albums, but holds lives together all the same. Then one afternoon, a small package arrived. No return address, just my name handwritten on the brown paper in neat, slanted lettering. I opened it carefully. Inside was thick ivory stationery, the ink slightly smudged at the edges. It was from Marina. She wrote about her grandmother, how she still practiced yoga twice a week, still walked to the farmer's market every Saturday. She remembered in detail the days when the world had quietly started giving up on her, and how there had been one doctor who hadn't, who stayed past visiting hours, who treated her like a person, not a patient, a woman still capable of joy, still worthy of dignity. You didn't just save her life, she wrote. You reminded her she was still living. I read the letter 3 times, traced the words with my fingers, and that night, I framed it, hung it above my desk where the morning sun could touch it, a quiet, permanent reminder. I was never invisible, never too much, never a burden. I was exactly who I needed to be all along, and their inability to see that was never mine to carry. Weeks later, another email arrived, less polished this time, more desperate. We miss you. We never meant to hurt you. Can we start over? And buried near the end, like a sliver under the skin, came the real reason. Please ask Marina to take down her post. Ethan's having trouble finding work now. It's affecting his future. Not an apology, not remorse. Just another transaction. Another debt they assumed I'd pay to keep the peace. I didn't respond. Some bridges don't need rebuilding. Some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. Not out of hate, but out of self-respect. That evening, as I filed notes at my desk, sunlight stretched across the letter from Marina. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because someone finally told me I mattered, but because I had stopped asking for permission to believe it. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment, tell me what part hit home, or simply say you see me, because maybe in doing so, we remind others they're not alone. If you've ever felt overlooked, like you had to earn love through silence or sacrifice, please know this: you are allowed to take up space, you are allowed to say no, and you are allowed to build a life that doesn't include people who only show up when it benefits them. Let's start choosing peace over performance. Together.